Hello, I am doing this presentation for my employment law class at Eastern New Mexico University. The subject is due process models. This presentation will relate the information I find to how it applies to employment law. The presentation will take a look at the ethical behavior during this process and how that behavior can cause problems in the workplace. So the first slide asks, what is due process? Okay, so what is due process? Due process is a legal term. It is found in the Fifth Amendment. So on this slide, we ask the question, what is a due process model? A due process model is a type of justice system. The justice system is based on the principle that a citizen has some absolute rights and cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the appropriate legal proceedings and safeguards. Due process can be procedural or substantive. Procedural due process means that fair methods are used when trying to determine if a person's life, liberty, or property should be taken away. Substantive due process means that there must be a valid government justification for taking a person's life, liberty, or property away. An example of criminal due process would be when a person is charged with a crime, they have the right to be notified of what they are charged with. They have a right to a speedy trial, and they have to be given an opportunity to tell their side of the story. And they also have a right to be represented by an attorney. An example of civil due process would be a tax foreclosure. The person has a right to pay the full amount owed within a certain period of time and before it is sold out from underneath them. And they have the right to contest and appeal the process if there is an error. How this applies to employment law and what we have been studying about this semester is that due process must be given without discrimination to gender, nationality, handicap, or age in the workplace. So employment due process, what does that mean? Employment due process means recognizing the employee's rights. What are those rights? The employee has the right to be informed of unsatisfactory performance on the job. The employee has the right to correct the performance before he or she is terminated. The property right protection in the workplace. The property right protection obligates management in the workplace to, in good faith, take corrective action that is based on just cause for a good reason. That's what just cause means. What this means is that the business must take corrective actions against the employee only for clear, compelling, and justifiable reasons. Any other way could violate the rights of the employee and give cause for legal action against the employer. Okay, so this slide looks at the steps of due process in the workplace. Step 1, the employee must understand expectations and consequences. That means good policies, good procedures, things that employees can follow and know that if they do not follow them, there will be consequences. Step 2, employer cannot waver on consequences. That means that consistent consequences for all, for everyone, for all. Step 3, the consequences must be equal to the action. What that means is that you couldn't fire Johnny because he ate a French fry. It has to be substantial or equal to the action. I mean, for that, you might have wrote him up or told him that, it wasn't policy to do that, but I don't think he would have been fired. I don't think that would have been equal consequences for his actions. The employee must be able to respond. Listen to their side of it. Listen to what they have to say. The employee has a right to be heard. There could be circumstances that you didn't know about for the behavior. So step 5, the employee must have time to respond. Give them time to respond. Let them think about it. Come back to you. Yeah. Okay, so on this slide, we talk about other rules of thumb for due process. The employer has the right to change the policies. With that being said, employers should give the employee advance notice of a policy change and the date that change goes into effect. Again, infractions must be consistent. So what that means is that although the infractions do not need to be identical in consequences, they need to be consistent. For example, a manager might feel that different disciplinary action is needed for an employee that is late 4 to 5 days out of the week than for one that was late one time in the last 6 months for something that he didn't even have control of. So yeah, the infractions, they must be consistent and they need to be according to what happened. So don't go overboard. The final incident. What are we talking about, the final incident? From a legal perspective, an employer needs to have documentation in place that shows a progression towards termination before actually terminating the employee. That is why the write-up process is in place for many businesses. A paper trail is always better because the paper trail shows a progression towards a termination and all the steps taken to change the situation for the employee before he was actually terminated. Okay, ethical implications in due process. The decision to terminate an employee can cause legal problems, such as claims of discrimination or retaliation claims, and many others, harassment in the workplace. So, questions that a manager needs to ask themselves before terminating an employee. Is there a legitimate explanation for the employee's actions? Does the punishment fit the crime? Are there any other alternatives to termination? Does the employee have a pre-termination agreement? Has the company administrated discipline in a consistent manner? These are all questions that need to be asked if you are a manager before you just terminate somebody, because there can be ethical implications. Managers can avoid problems by following all procedures and policies within their organizations. Managers should respect the privacy of the employee. So don't go spreading around all this stuff around work. Okay, so this slide covers civil and criminal due process. Civil due process. In civil due process, it is a balancing test that evaluates the government's chosen procedure with respect to the private interest affected. State rules. Criminal due process. The Fourth Amendment covers search and seizure. Due process denies the national government the authority to make general search of person or property. Exceptions are police. They can search a person that is arrested. They can search items in plain view of the accused person. They can seize any items that are within the reach of the accused person. Police can search the property where there is a strong suspicion that a person could be in immediate danger. Fifth Amendment requires that a citizen cannot be accused of a serious crime without a grand jury investigation. It also prevents double jeopardy, which is a second trial for the same crime. It grants the right for the defendant to refrain from testifying against him or herself. Also covers Miranda rights, which is the right to remain silent and have counsel present. Also, another important principle is that the Fourth and Fifth Amendment exclude evidence that is gathered illegally and cannot be used in a trial. The Sixth Amendment guarantees that an individual accused of a crime has the right to have counsel for his or her defense. The Eighth Amendment prohibits cruel and unusual punishment and covers excessive bail. This refers to capital punishment. Procedural and substantive due process. Substantive due process, it protects the general rights of a person, like freedom of speech and freedom of expression. So, how does substantive due process work? Substantive due process works by identifying a particular line of case, and it identifies an attitude. The rights covered in substantive due process are the first 8 amendments in the Bill of Rights, the right to take part in political process, which is voting, the right of discrete and insular minorities, which is Equal Right Protection Clause. Procedural due process refers to the constitutional requirements that when the federal government acts in such a way that denies a citizen of life, liberty, or property interest, the federal government must give notice to the person and offer them the opportunity to be heard. Final thoughts. Every person has certain rights in the workplace and as a human being according to the law. Due process protects the American worker from being terminated without a good reason. With many laws protecting the employer, due process is the one law that protects the employee. Due process in employment law helps protect the employee from losing any human rights acquired by being abused by the employer or the system. With unethical practices in the workplace and in the business sector on the rise, due process in the workplace gives the employee certain rights that under the law cannot be taken away from them. Due process in the workplace requires employers to treat employees fair in every aspect of the job and holds employers to a high standard of ethical behavior. In the event that an employer has less than ethical reasons for terminating, questioning, reporting, or reprimanding an employee, due process will hold the employer's feet to the fire according to the law. Thank you.